There is a sentence in the Bible that has haunted people for centuries. The blasphemy against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. Not in this age, not in the age to come. For some people, those words land and never fully leave. They sit somewhere quiet in the mind. And then, one day, in a moment of doubt, of anger, of darkness, a thought arrives. What if I did it? What if I already crossed the line? What if it's too late? This video exists because that fear is real, and because the text that created that fear may say something very different from what most people think it says. Is there a sin so final that even God will not forgive it? The answer is yes, but what that sin actually is will surprise you. Matthew 12. Jesus has just healed a man who was blind and mute. The crowds are stunned. The Pharisees respond, not with questions, not with doubt, with a verdict. It is only by Beelzebul, the prince of demons, that this man drives out demons. They see the miracle, they know what it is, and they deliberately call it the work of Satan. And it is in response to this, specifically this, that Jesus says, "Every sin and blasphemy will be forgiven, but the blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. Anyone who speaks against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but anyone who speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in this age or in the age to come." Now stop. Read the context again. Jesus is not speaking to people who are afraid. He is not speaking to doubters. He is not speaking to people who have walked away and want to come back. He is speaking to men who looked at undeniable evidence and made a deliberate, public, confident choice about what to call it. Mark's Gospel adds one sentence Matthew does not. He said this because they were saying he has an evil spirit. Not because they were confused, because of what they were deliberately and persistently saying. The context is not a detail, it is everything. Before we can understand what this sin is, we need to clear away what it is not. It is not saying the wrong thing in a moment of anger. It is not doubting God. It is not losing your faith temporarily. It is not committing a serious moral failure. It is not being furious at God in a dark season. It is not walking away from church. Every one of these misreadings has caused real damage to real people, people already struggling, who encountered this passage and concluded a door had permanently closed on them. The text does not support any of these interpretations, not one. Here is the most important distinction in this entire investigation. Most people read this passage as describing an act, a specific word spoken, a specific line crossed in a single moment. But look at what the text actually shows. The Pharisees were not having a bad day. This was not an impulsive reaction immediately regretted. They had been watching Jesus for months, miracle after miracle, teaching unlike anything anyone had ever heard. And their response, consistently, deliberately, persistently, was to attribute everything they witnessed to darkness. This is not one word. This is a direction. A sustained, deliberate, eyes-open rejection of what they were clearly seeing, not once, again and again, until the rejection itself becomes the only direction the will moves. This is not a moment someone stumbles into. It is a state someone settles into, over time, with full knowledge of what they are doing. Theologians across centuries have wrestled with this passage. Most serious readings converge on something the text itself supports. This sin is defined not by its content, but by its character. Sustained, deliberate, unrepentant, a persistent attribution of God's clear work to evil by someone who sees clearly and keeps choosing anyway. Augustine called it final impenitence. Not a single act, a final condition. Calvin argued it required full clarity of sight, seeing the undeniable and persistently calling it something else. The common thread across these readings: this is not committed accidentally. It is not committed in ignorance. It is not committed by someone who is still asking questions. It requires a will that has seen clearly and has made a deliberate, sustained choice to reject what it has seen. Now we arrive at what almost every serious reader of this passage has observed, and it changes everything about how this passage should be read. The people Jesus was addressing were not afraid. They were not lying awake wondering if they had gone too far. They were confident, certain, publicly, boldly declaring their position. The nature of the sin the text describes is settled, deliberate, and untroubled. Now consider the person who fears they have committed it, who lies awake, who trembles when they read this passage, who desperately wants to know if there is still a way back. That fear, that specific, aching, desperate fear, is not compatible with the settled, untroubled rejection the text describes. A will that is genuinely and finally closed to God does not agonize over whether it is closed. It simply is. Which means the person most terrified of having committed this sin is almost certainly not the person the text is describing. The Pharisees never asked the question. They never feared. They never trembled. They looked at the light, called it darkness, and moved on without a second thought. Is there a sin God will never forgive? The text says yes. Jesus said it clearly, and this script will not pretend otherwise. But the text also reveals something most people never reach. The sin described requires something most frightened people do not have: a settled, deliberate, eyes-open, untroubled rejection of what God is clearly doing. Not fear, not doubt, not a desperate question asked at 3 in the morning. Too late? If you are asking that question, if that fear has any weight in you at all, then what you are carrying is not the mark of someone who has crossed that line. It is the mark of someone who hasn't. The question itself is the evidence.